Good evening. Good evening and welcome. My name is Farr Curlin, and I'm a professor of medicine and medical humanities here at Duke, where I also serve as the faculty director of the Arte Initiative, which is part of Duke's Keenan Institute for Ethics. The Arte Initiative sponsors scholarship and learning opportunities focused on cultivating the virtues in contemporary life. Among the virtues are those that we might describe as intellectual virtues, good habits of mind, and it seems that those virtues are particularly important for those of us who do our work in a university context, where the back and forth, exchange of ideas, having sincere disagreements and intellectual debates is so central to our vocations. And cultivating the virtues displayed in thinking well, particularly in the face of deep disagreement, is difficult, sometimes painfully so, as the title of tonight's talk suggests. I want to thank John Rose, the Associate Director of the Arte Initiative, whose vision and lots of hard work has brought this lecture and the events around it into fruition. I also want to thank our two co-sponsors, the North Carolina Study Center and the Center for Christianity and Scholarship. And now I want to invite to the podium Valerie Ashby, who is the Dean of the Trinity College of Arts and Sciences here at Duke, and she will introduce our speaker. Dean Ashby.
Thank you. I'm so happy to see the room packed this afternoon. So first of all, on behalf of the Duke community, which I just have to tell you how weird this is, for those of you who can't appreciate the irony, I'm looking at two rows of my UNC colleagues here on the front row, not the least of which is Kevin Guskowitz, who, how do I describe this? For those of you who are at Duke, Kevin was Dan Keyhart when I was Kathy Franz. If you don't know what that means, ask your friends. Kevin was the Dean of Natural Sciences when I was chairing chemistry over at UNC, and now he is my fellow dean colleague, and it's a pleasure to see him here this evening along with my other colleagues from UNC, and I think we're also Provost Bluen, so good to see you. So welcome to all of you who have joined us here tonight. As I just mentioned, I received both of my degrees from UNC, and so it's just a privilege to partner with you and to see you here participating in this event with us this evening. I also want to acknowledge Provost Bluen, my new provost, and that is Sally Kornbluth, and what a pleasure it is to work with Sally, as you know, and it's just a privilege to be here. This is a very proud moment for me because I feel like I'm a part of two families, and that's except on you-know-what night, a night that will remain unnamed at the moment. We'll talk about that later. So tonight's lecturer, Professor Alan Jacobs of the Baylor Honors Program, is a scholar of many things, though he is best known for his work in theology and literature. He has published in a wide variety of magazines, including Harper's, First Things, and The Atlantic. His numerous books include a biography of C.S. Lewis, a critical edition of W.H. Auden poetry, and most recently, the book How to Think: A Survival Guide for a World at Odds, which is the inspiration for his talk tonight. The book has received significant attention and praise. David Brooks of the New York Times has described Jacobs' book as essential for understanding why there is so much bad thinking in political life right now. How to Think discusses the ways in which our tendencies toward cultural tribalism, in-group and out-group ways of thinking, make us less than fully rational creatures when assessing arguments contrary to our own. As new data from the social sciences has shown, we aren't as smart or even as even-handed as we'd like to think. This, needless to say, is a far more harmful form of prejudice than those stirred up on basketball courts. But Jacob's message isn't entirely discouraging, And hopefully we'll have the opportunity here tonight to hear some of the positive sides. We can, as he says, get better at thinking and through hard work cultivate the academic virtues of intellectual humility and clarity and charity. Jacob's lecture tonight is entitled Embrace the Pain, Living with the Repugnant Cultural Other. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming out. I've had a really delightful visit here so far. I came in on Saturday evening, and the weeping and lamentation was not as loud as one might have expected it to be, so that's a good sign for the overall health of the community. I've had a wonderful time today in a couple of classes. Walter Sennett Armstrong students were lively and engaging and responsive, as were those of Jed Atkins, and so it's been really great to get to know some Duke folks and the faculty and the students as well. So I'm hoping that this will be a helpful talk. I'm going to begin by telling you what I'm going to try not to say. I cannot promise that I will succeed in not saying these things, but I'm going to make every effort not to say these things. First of all, I will try not to ask in plaintive tones, why can't we all just get along? I will try not to make a plea for civility. I will try to be civil, but I will try not to tell other people that they're not being civil. Above all, I will try not to exhort you to consider that you might be wrong. As G.K. Chesterton said about a century ago, what we suffer from today is humility in the wrong place. Modesty has moved from the organ of ambition, and modesty has settled upon the organ of conviction, where it was never meant to be. A man was meant to be doubtful about himself, but undoubting about the truth. This has been exactly reversed. At any street corner, we may meet a man who utters the frantic and blasphemous statement that he may be wrong. Every day one comes across somebody who says that of course his view may not be the right one. Of course his view must be the right one, or it is not his view. We are on the road to producing a race of men too mentally modest to believe in the multiplication table. I'll come back later on to why I think this is important. With those three commitments firmly in place, or as firmly as I can get them, and with the promise that you'll have the chance later on to tell me if I fail to meet my promises, I want to go to just one more preliminary thing. I'm going to be talking about life in the university tonight, and I don't usually do autobiography at talks, but I want to do a bit of an autobiographical preface here because it has an effect on how I think about the university. My experience of the university has an effect on how I think about it even today. And this may sound a bit like, in my day we walked to school in snow every day uphill 5 miles both ways. But so forgive me for that part of it. But I'm the only member of my immediate, or for that matter, extended family to have gone to college. Nobody else in my family has gone to college, and in fact, my parents did not graduate from high school, though they did. My mother later on took the GED, the equivalency exam. And my parents were not interested in my going to college either. My father was in prison almost all of my childhood. I was raised largely by my grandmother because my mother had to work to sort of make ends meet. And when I decided that I wanted to go to college, my father was out of prison by that time, but my parents thought it was completely frivolous. They wanted me to get a job and help contribute to the economic success of the family, and there was a good bit of tension in the family because of my decision to do something which struck them as completely without any value. Now, this is what's really going to date me. You'll get an idea of how old I am. This is the sort of thing that people tell their grandkids. I paid for my own college education by working a part-time job. That is manifestly impossible now, but I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. My parents did ultimately condescend to let me stay in my bedroom for the first 2 years of college before they kicked me out. And I could pay for my education at the University of Alabama at Birmingham for by working 25 hours a week during the term and full-time out of term, which is just astonishing. I then went on to finish my degree at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, and that was a little harder, but I still was able to graduate without student loans. But I did it because I paid for it myself, and that made that experience valuable to me in certain rather distinctive ways that actually have a part to play in the story that I'm going to tell tonight. So that's where that comes from. It's not necessarily a tougher road than many of you have or have had, but it's certainly different than what a lot of people experience. And it has a lot to do with why I'm where I am today. Baylor, even in the Honors College, we have a lot of first-generation college students, and my heart is with them in a particular way. And I teach freshman seminars every year. In fact, when I came to Baylor, I came on the condition that they would not ask me to teach graduate students. I've softened in that position since then, but I really do love first years. I love people who are new to the college experience, and that has a lot to do with my own background. So I wanted to give that context because I think, as I say, it has some effect on the argument that I'm going to make. So now on to the substance of the talk. So 3 promises, a confession, and now the substance of the talk. I sometimes feel that this is John Stuart Mill's world, and we're all just trying with varying degrees of success to learn how to live in it. Mill gets plenty of credit as the philosopher of the liberal social order, but I'm not sure he gets enough. And tonight I want to set 2 brief quotations from Mill next to each other and see how they interact. Both quotations, as it happens, and not at all incidentally, are from his book On Liberty. The first is a passage that has been much quoted in the last couple of years by people who believe that this nation's universities are becoming ideologically uniform and hostile to genuine debate. It goes like this: "He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. His reasons may be good, and no one may have been able to refute them, but if he is equally unable to refute the reasons on the opposite side, if he does not so much as know what they are, he has no ground for preferring either opinion." And here's the other one: Mill's concise articulation of what has come to be known as the harm principle. "The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others." Those are the 2 quotes. I think we in the American Academy are living through a moment in which these 2 statements seem to be in serious tension with each other. For what happens if, in my view, the opposite side of the case, simply through its public presence, does harm to me or others? There are many ways of talking about this general problem. I could speak of what the United States Supreme Court in the notorious Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire decision of 1942 called fighting words. I could look at the long history of debates about the limits of free speech. That would be to put the debate in a legal context, and indeed there are always legal dimensions to these issues, especially for public universities like UNC, but also for private ones like Duke as well. Nevertheless, I'm going to set law aside for this talk and turn my attention instead to the ways disagreement, even painful disagreement, works in a community of learning and how it might work better. I'm going to start by describing a phenomenon identified by the anthropologist Susan Friend Harding. As a graduate student, she decided that she wanted to do ethnographic work on a curious social group, fundamentalist Christians. She felt that she had hit upon a useful project focusing on an understudied group, and therefore was surprised and dismayed when her professors displayed considerable skepticism about the plan. In an essay she wrote some years later about the experience, she says that she gradually realized that they were all, in effect, if not in so many words, asking her, "Are you now or have you ever been a fundamentalist Christian?" Which some of you will recognize as an echo of the House Un-American Activities Committee in 1950s asking whether, "Are you now or have you ever been a communist?" As Harding reflected on this unexpected and uncomfortable experience, she came to understand that Christian fundamentalists in the mental world of her anthropological colleagues played a distinctive role, which she came to call the repugnant cultural other. And we're going to use that phrase several times here, and so we're going to abbreviate it to RCO. Okay, the RCO. Of course, the sorts of peoples that one imagines anthropologists studying, Bedouins or tiny communities in the Amazon basin or the highlands of Papua New Guinea, are certainly quite other to American academics, but they aren't nearly as repugnant. For an obvious reason, they don't impinge on the lives of those academics any more than the academics want. When an anthropologist flies back to Boston from the Sudan, the Bedouins don't come along. But fundamentalist Christians shop at the same grocery stores that you do, and worse yet, vote in the same elections and attend the same universities. The psychiatrist and blogger Scott Alexander puts the distinction this way. You don't just have an in-group and an out-group. You have an in-group, an out-group, and a far group. Members of the far group will probably be considerably more different from you than members of the out group, will very likely take moral and political stances that you find abominable, but they do not arouse the same repugnance as the out group simply because they are far. Only those who share the same daily world with you are likely to become for you the true out group and therefore the true RCO, repugnant cultural other. This is why I tend to smile when I see many academic arguments for accepting otherness. An extreme example, perhaps, though a provocative and kind of fascinating one, is in Donna Haraway's recent book, Staying with the Trouble, in which she celebrates all sorts of connections with what she calls oddkin, multifarious forms of the non-human. When Haraway asks me to envision, quote, a symbiogenetic join of a human child and monarch butterflies, close quote, I think, well, that's cool, I guess, but my question is, what kinship do you have with that dude sharing the coffee shop line with you in his Make America Great Again cap? Now we're really talking oddkin, at that point. Let me pause to remind you of one of the things I promised not to say, or promised to try not to say. Why can't we all just get along? I'm not going to suggest that maybe that guy in the MAGA cap is actually a fine fellow, just so misunderstood. And if Donna Haraway would simply take the time to get to know him, she might discover that they share the same interests. And then the next time they're in the coffee shop, she sipping her organic soy cortado, he dumping 3 packets of sugar into his drip coffee, they could bond over a mutual love of origami or NASCAR. I mean, you sometimes read newspaper stories like that, right? Where the people who were utterly at odds and then they found out that they had something in common and now they're best friends. I mean, they're genuinely heartwarming stories, but in some ways they make the best of a situation which is not likely always to be so easily resolved. I don't think those stories are common or likely. Let's go rather with something close to the opposite assumption, that your RCO really is pretty repugnant. Or at least many of his views are. What now? And bringing this discussion back to the academic context, what if you share a dorm floor, or an apartment building, or a seminar class, or an office hallway with him? How are you going to manage that? Can you somehow make kin with someone that odd to you? And if not, what do you do instead? I think the first step should be getting a strong grip on the kind of environment you're actually in. And here I want to consider the situation of students as opposed to faculty. A couple of years ago, when there was a massive controversy that many of you will remember at Yale's Silliman College, one of the charges brought against the leadership of the college was that they had allowed damage to the student's home. One student wrote, I feel that my home is being threatened. The associate master of Silliman, quote, did not just start a political discourse as she intended, she marginalized many students in what is supposed to be their home, close quote. I don't in any way blame the students for saying that, because many colleges and universities, most of them, I suppose almost all of them, promise or at least express the hope that students will find that place a real home. What do we call that one weekend each fall when graduates return to what some of them still refer to as alma mater? We call it homecoming, as though alums are all Telemachus returning to Ithaca after a perilous journey to Pylos and Sparta. But this is not a contemptible conceit by any means. Kenneth Tynan, the great English theatrical impresario and writer, wanted his ashes to be scattered at his Oxford College, Magdalen, because it was the only place that he had ever felt he truly belonged. And he was heartbroken when he was told it couldn't happen. He ended up getting buried in a cemetery in Oxford, which he had never seen and never visited because it was the closest place he could be buried to the place that he really did feel was his home in ways that his family home had never been. And that's a feeling to be honored. I've talked to former students of mine who feel much the same about their own college years. Maybe some of you feel that about your college years. And when that kind of thing happens, it's a victory for those of us who teach, but not an unalloyed victory. Because no college or university is supposed to be any student's home. It is, at Duke anyway, and in places where I have taught, a largely residential academy where people from all over the world, from a wide range of social backgrounds and with a wide range of interests and abilities, come to live together for about 30 weeks a year for about 4 years before moving on to the rest of their lives. It is an essentially public space, though with controls on ingress and egress to prevent chaos and foster friendship and fellowship, and it is meant to be temporary. We may call that common autumn event homecoming, but after a long weekend, at most, the children all scatter and dear alma mater is left with her most recent brood of hatchlings, who, after all, deserve the lion's share of her attention. Magdalen College was not Kenneth Tynan's home, and could not have been, because there were other people there who didn't even know him, or knew him but didn't like him, or whose preferences were radically different than his, and who had no long-term bond with him to force them to come to some mutually agreeable terms beyond basic tolerance for, in that case, 3 years. The notion of college as home, then, is not a contemptible conceit, but it is a conceit. And if we set it aside, we may be able to accomplish two things. First, to lower the temperature of the disputes, and second, to understand better how students are actually situated. There's a fairly comical story to be told about my attempts as I was thinking about this talk to come up with the right metaphor for what I believe the college years are supposed to be, at least in relation to the problems I'm trying to address tonight. I don't know whether any of you if you've ever seen Whit Stillman's movie Barcelona. There's a wonderfully comic moment, or a couple of moments in the movie, where someone makes the unfortunate decision to try to explain U.S. foreign policy in Latin America in relation to rival colonies of ants. And that ends up being a disastrous choice of metaphor in all sorts of ways. And so I'm a little worried about that. I worked for a while on one about how motorcycle stunt jumpers manage to practice their stunts without injuring themselves or getting killed. I went with the demolition derby for a little while, which I think sort of suits my Alabama background. And there were several others which I won't even talk to you about. They're too embarrassing. But eventually I discarded all those images, but not before it occurred to me that what they all had in common, what I was trying to get at, however ineptly, was the collection of ideas that cluster around our practices of play. Please don't bolt for the door at this point. When I speak of play, I do not refer to anything frivolous or trivial. Play is a highly structured form of experience that is essential to the intellectual and social development and health of humans and of many other creatures. We do well to reflect on how it works and the role it can play, the role that play can play. Sorry about that. And if you have any doubts about the sort of essentially human and essentially social characteristics of play, read Hermann Hesse's novel, The Glass Bead Game, which I think is a brilliant exposition of how the particular kind of structured experience we call play changes us. In the single greatest study of the play element of culture by Johann Huizinga, the book is called Homo Ludens, Huizinga identifies several characteristics of play, all of which I think are relevant to understanding how college life should work for students. For Huizinga, the first main characteristic, this is a quote, the first main characteristic of play is that it is free. It is in fact freedom. Like many teachers, I often point out to my students that the word school derives from scholia, leisure, and though they typically respond to this by rolling their eyes so dramatically, I fear they're going to do themselves an ocular injury of some kind. The point is nevertheless true and salutary. Students' parents, or some generous donor, or some government agency or maybe most likely of all their future selves, have paid to liberate them from some or all work obligations so that they might have the leisure to study and think. It is a precious freedom bought for a price, and often a heavy price. I am perhaps more aware of this than some because I had the privilege, though it then seemed a heavy burden of paying for my education myself. As I mentioned earlier, pay to play is a phrase that has special meaning for me. Going to class really did feel like a luxury to me. It's one of the ways in which it has shaped the talk that I'm giving here. Okay, so play is freedom. Huizinga continues. A second characteristic of play is closely connected with this, namely that play is not ordinary or real life. It is rather a stepping out of real life into a temporary sphere of activity with a disposition all its own. That whole passage just littered with scare quotes, ordinary, real, etc., all are scare quoted because, of course, play is just as real as anything else. But he means in relation to what we typically think of and designate as ordinary life or real life. Moreover, it is played out within certain limits of time and place. It contains its own course and meaning. Play begins, and then at a certain moment it is over. I think you see the relation between this and my earlier claim that the university is not anybody's home, but rather a temporary and spatially specific place of learning and development. One more point from Huizinga. Play creates order, is order. The profound affinity between play and order is perhaps the reason why play seems to lie to such a large extent in the field of aesthetics. Play has a tendency to be beautiful. Close quote. And that is one of the reasons why people love it. At its best, the university experience, with its order and structure and room for artful creativity within that order, is really, really beautiful. And that's what it was for me. It was the understanding it's not this way for everybody, but I still think it's worthwhile noting that it can be this. For me, the university was a space of play that allowed me intellectual creativity and the leisure to think and read that stood in constant contrast with my life at home, with my life with my family, who were so suspicious of and hostile towards this activity. So that was not frivolity on my part to enjoy the play that the university offered me. This structured, orderly, set-apart world in which I could think, I could try out ideas, I could try out personalities, I could try different models of thinking. That was radically freeing to me and deeply beautiful. And for me now, that's the model of what I want to create for my students and what I think universities in general should strive to create for their students. Of course, none of this is to say that the boundaries between play and the rest of life are fixed and uncrossable. They are rather quite porous, and they need to be. You can see that, for instance, you don't even have to look at human behavior, look at animal behavior, look at the way dogs play. The playing of dogs, and Huizinga points this out, is closely related to the kinds of practices and behaviors, hunting, for instance, that are essential to their survival. Play is a closed-off world in which, with limited consequences, exploration, innovation, imagination, and creativity can happen. Limited consequences, but not none. Essential to all game playing is some measure of resistance, some measure of conflict, and even of pain. People get hurt in games, sometimes physically, sometimes emotionally, sometimes mentally. In the game we call undergraduate education, physical harm is rare, happens, but it is rare and excluded whenever possible. But some level of mental and emotional pain is part and parcel of the game, actually intrinsic to it. And while that can be bad, indeed very bad, it is not inevitably and always bad. When my son was quite young, I took him for his annual checkup at the doctor. After the doctor did this usual kind of once-over, he said, "Now, I need to look for bruises." And I was alarmed and offended. I don't hurt my child. And he said, "No, I actually want to see some." I said, at his stage of development, if he doesn't have bruises, he's not taking enough risks to result in actual development. If he doesn't have any bruises, then he's probably too cautious and needs to be encouraged to take more risks. And I've often reflected on what Dr. Judge said that day. And even now I apply it to myself, not so much in terms of physical risk-taking. I think, in my age, that ship has sailed. But in terms of intellectual risk-taking. I've seen too many people who are my age, in fact, younger than me, who have settled into certain fixed practices of the intellectual life and have absolutely no interest in altering those. And I don't want to be that kind of person. I mentioned this to somebody earlier today. When I was in grad school, I had a wonderful professor, who said that there was a class that he had taught so many times that he felt that if he got up and walked out of the room in the middle of the class, his voice would just keep on going, that he didn't need to be physically present. And I remember thinking at that time, God, please protect me from ever being that guy. Please protect me from ever being in that situation. And so I still think about this commendation of bruises. And here we're getting to the heart of the matter, as I see it. I want to argue, with a good bit of trepidation actually, that the task of the undergraduate student is to embrace this kind of pain, this bruising, and the task of teachers and administrators is, if they can, to structure the game in such a way that pain doesn't escalate into harm. And if we can manage that, then it's good for students, it's good for the university, and good for the society at large. So now I'm going to unpack that argument. My attempt to reconcile those two statements of Mill's that I quoted at the outset is based on the distinction between pain and harm. It does not follow, and in many of life's venues we understand this perfectly well, it is not an uncontroversial point, that it does not follow that all pain is harmful. But it is still pain. Yet our current conversation about the culture of the academy too often collapses into hostilities between those who think that if there is pain, there must be harm, and those who think if there is no harm, there can be no pain. Note this well. I do not claim to have the resources to judge for anyone else the intensity of their pain or the degree of harm it inflicts. It's not my call. I wonder if any of you happen to be familiar. There's a podcast called Song Exploder that is I think, a really wonderful podcast. So the idea is you get one song, and the interviewer talks to the musicians who made the song, and they basically take it apart. They play, we're going to play the bass line, we're going to play the drums, we're going to play the melody, and how did it come into being? And then at the end they put it together and play the whole song. So one of the most interesting recent episodes of Song Exploder, and it's one that's really stuck in my mind, was an interview with Questlove of The Roots. And The Roots did a song for Catherine Bigelow's movie Detroit called It Ain't Fair. And they made the song after having watched the entire movie, or at least a late cut of the movie. And Questlove was talking about the representation of the black experience in Hollywood movies, and he said something really interesting that I can't quite forget. He said, "I don't think Hollywood is ready or is going to be ready to open the Pandora's box of black pain." And I just thought that was Questlove is like super smart and thoughtful guy, but what a metaphor that is, the Pandora's box of black pain. And that's just Yeah, that's something I think about a lot. It's not for me to assess the depth of that pain or the profound harm that accompanies it. But what is for me to do as a teacher, and for all of us to do who work in the university, is to be aware of the potential for our educational and social environments to create pain and therefore perhaps harm. As many of you know, I am a Christian, and while I am not nearly as prayerful as Christians are supposed to be, I get really prayerful twice a year. Twice a year. It's when I'm ordering books for my classes. Because when I sit down and order books, I think about how dangerous books are. How many people are changed by their reading of books, sometimes for the better, but not always. I mean, sometimes it's a painful and even a destructive experience. And so I really hope that the books that I assign are books that, while they may cause pain, I hope and pray that they won't cause harm. And of course, that depends not just on the books that I assign, but it depends on me. It depends on how I teach them. It depends on what I bring to the classroom. Not long ago, I saw a tweet from a professor who quoted from his teaching evaluations a student who said that after taking that professor's class, she or he no longer knew what to think about anything. And the professor commented with evident self-satisfaction, "My work here is done." And I thought, no, dude, your work, if you understood it properly, is just beginning. Because most of us who have been around the Academy's rhetorical block a few dozen times know how to knock beliefs down. And some beliefs need to be knocked down, if only because of the unhealthy and unhelpful ways in which they are held and deployed. But if you're not helping to provide the tools by which something better might be built in place of what lies in ruins, then you haven't done your job at all. And that is a very difficult job. And that's why I get prayerful when I order books. And while I can't expect everyone to join me in that, I think it's fair to ask all of us involved in education to consider the pain that inevitably accompanies serious learning, and I do mean inevitably. I taught for many years at Wheaton College, a Christian liberal arts college, and sometimes parents of prospective students would visit or write and ask me to assure them that their children would emerge from their 4 years of college with a strong Christian faith. And I would always say, I cannot promise you that. I absolutely cannot promise you that. Liberal education is inherently risky. College students are exposed to powerful ideas and peculiar minds that can shake the very foundations of their self-understanding and their understanding of the world. And they can't control that exposure in the same way they control who they interact with on Snapchat or Instagram. Plus, of course, everybody changes, in many cases enormously, between the ages of 18 and 22. I mean, everybody does, no matter what. So no, I can't promise you that. There will be blood, you might say. But I don't want to spill any more of it than I have to. The task then for people who work in universities, and especially for teachers, is as best we can to understand some of the pain that accompanies learning and to try to prevent the accretion of harm and to steer those who experience that pain toward finding some benefit in it. And I mean that in small ways as well as large. Again, my experience comes in. When I was in undergrad, I failed 2 classes. And I failed them, 2 classes in the same semester, and I failed them because no one had ever explained to me what dropping a class is. So I just thought you just didn't go anymore. You know? I mean, no one had ever told me any differently. I do not even think I was assigned an academic advisor. I was navigating it on my own with no experience of college. That was painful and could have been harmful, though I think graduate admissions committees were perhaps a little more forgiving now than they are now. We're a little more forgiving then than they are now. I don't know. Could have been harmful. It was certainly painful, humiliating, frustrating. So there are small ways in which we can try to ameliorate the pain as well as big ones. It would have been nice if somebody had cared about my flourishing enough to give me some information on that point. In any case, it is in the hope of more caring surroundings for students today that I make the recommendation to them that's embedded in the title of this talk, Embrace the Pain. Because that is not counsel that any reasonable person would take unless she is persuaded that we teachers and administrators mean her well, that we wish her to flourish. In today's university, where administrative and legal structures tend to imprison us all in what Max Weber called the iron cage of rationalization, and to render us all mere executors of functions, trust is more to be prized than rubies. All honor then, I say, to those who seek trust. And maybe even greater honor to the university leaders who ask, what can we do collectively, institutionally, to nourish our students' trust in us? So if we dare to embrace the pain while striving to minimize the harm, what does that look like? And how does it help us deal with our RCO? How can the presence of my RCO in my community be seen as a feature rather than a bug? It begins with the understanding that we come together temporarily in this place so that we may play a certain complex and meaningful game, a game that involves trying out intellectual and personal positions, testing my beliefs and my identity in relation to others that are doing the same, and playing this game under the guidance and direction of people whom we all trust to run it fairly and with our flourishing in mind. With that framework in place, then, we might be able genuinely to hear Mill's word of warning. He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. His reasons may be good, and no one may have been able to refute them, but if he is equally unable to refute the reasons on the opposite side, if he does not so much as know what they are, he has no ground for preferring either opinion. There it is again. In a healthily functioning academic community, these words can be heard as a health-giving challenge rather than a threat to be feared. In such a community, my RCO can therefore play a role in strengthening and clarifying my convictions, even if that's the last thing he would want to do. Recall my opening promise that following Chesterton, I would try not to ask you to consider you might be wrong. To take a couple of extreme examples, do we really want a world in which Elie Wiesel seriously considers whether the Nazis might have been justified after all in implementing the final solution? Or where Malcolm X pauses to consider whether white supremacy is, after all is said and done, the best way to go? I think not. But that doesn't mean that, even in the big and uncontrolled outside world, and still more in the semi-controlled realm of academic conversation, we don't benefit from a better understanding of what people we disagree with think and why they think as they do. Chesterton deplored the movement of modesty from the organ of ambition to the organ of conviction. He doesn't want you to be modest about your convictions, but rather about your ambitions, by which he means all the ways you hope to put your convictions into effect. He wants you to be confident about your ends, but critical and even skeptical about your preferred means to those ends. He wants you to consider all the different ways you might get to the goal you treasure, and in this endeavor, your RCO can help, even if, again, he wouldn't want to. I suggested at the outset of this talk that embracing the pain, that learning to live with the RCO has personal but also larger social benefits. In order to explain how that works, I'm going to go back a couple of centuries to a fascinating little document by a series of letters by the German playwright and social reformer Friedrich Schiller on what he called aesthetic education. Some of Schiller's arguments I'm going to take straight, some I'm going to steal and shamelessly adapt for our purposes, so what follows will not be reputable scholarship, but I hope it will be enlightening. So, like many German romantics, Schiller believed that the society of Athens in the period roughly between Socrates and Aristotle was the greatest in human history. And for Schiller, what made it great was that it achieved the highest possible level of cultural richness and complexity that is graspable by one human mind. Okay? The greatest level of complexity and sophistication graspable by one human mind. That is, the whole genius of the culture could in theory be held in each citizen's mind. From this point, Schiller believed there could only be decline of one kind or another. The society could lose some of its complexity and retreat into a less highly developed condition. Or, conversely, it could continue along the path of increasing complexity and quickly reach the point at which general comprehension and of the life world was impossible, and people would have to become specialists and only know some part of what the society as a whole had to offer. Therefore, they would lose their unity with one another because they wouldn't have this common body of understanding. Germany in the 18th century, Schiller believed, suffered from this overcomplication, which led to differentiation and specialization, which in turn led to a lack of social cohesion. I think we can recognize those conditions in our own society. And he believes that what he calls aesthetic education can help address this unfortunate situation. Schiller argues that all these specializations of knowledge and practice can be understood through the identification of two major human impulses. He calls one of them the material impulse and the other the formal impulse. It's easy to oversimplify these concepts, and because I like what's easy, I will now oversimplify these concepts. The material impulse seeks immersion in the chaotic and manifold world of the senses. The formal impulse seeks to find, or if necessary, impose intellectual order on all that chaos. The material impulse is therefore the RCO, as it were, of the formal one, and vice versa. Here's Schiller's summary of the opposition. Expressed as a general concept, the object of the material impulse is called life, in its widest meaning, a concept signifying all material being, everything directly present to the senses. The object of the formal impulse, expressed again as a general concept, is called form, both in the figurative and the literal sense of the word, a concept that includes all the formal properties of things and all of their relations to the powers of thought. But what if these principles can be brought into constructive relation with one another? Which is to say, what if people who gravitate towards the one can be brought into constructive relation with people who gravitate towards the other? The result, Schiller says, and this may be surprising, he says when that happens, what you get is play. Play. The union of the material impulse and the formal impulse, Schiller calls the playful impulse. Remember what Huizinga says about the relationship between play and beauty? Well, Schiller contends that if the material impulse is about life and the formal impulse about form, then, quote, the object of the playful impulse presented in general outline can consequently be called living form, a concept serving to characterize all aesthetic properties of phenomena, what is in a word most generally called beauty. That when you unite these oppositions, you do so playfully, and the result is something that is beautiful. And the centrality to Schiller's vision of this creation and appreciation of beauty is why his little book is about aesthetic education. But here's the kicker, and here is what really genuinely matters here. These letters were Schiller's primary response to the failings of the French Revolution. That is, in the French Revolution, he felt that opposing principles had come to be fundamentally at war with one another in such a way that the revolution was bound to fail. It was bound to collapse into terror. And so what he is doing is, in trying to imagine aesthetic education, is actually trying to imagine a healthier social and political realm. He's trying to imagine how opposite impulses can be brought into playful relation with the result being something that is beautiful. It's a political document through and through. It looks like it's avoiding politics in order to talk about aesthetics, but instead, just the opposite. It's the aesthetics that are essential to a healthy political and social framework. If we translate Schiller's proposed union of divergent impulses into the terms of today's American university, which is what in my thoroughly unscholarly way I am hoping to do, then we might draw certain useful conclusions. Chief among them, I think, is that we might see the possibility of bringing repugnant cultural others together in a structured, game-like social environment guided by trustworthy opportunity as an opportunity for genuine play, genuine beauty, genuine creativity. And we might then see that such an environment could be good for the flourishing not only of the people directly involved, but also for the good of society as a whole. Because there is nothing except mutual charity that our social order needs more right now than political creativity. We have been locked for far too long into the same reductive set of simplistic oppositions. If at university students can play in ways that take them beyond these oppositions into a new social imaginary, then we would all benefit. And such a possibility is worth staking the future of the university on, I believe, because we so desperately need that creativity. So this is almost the end. I want to take a moment here to remember and honor Ursula K. Le Guin, one of the greatest American writers of our time who died last week at the age of 88. She has meant an enormous amount to me. One of the absolute formative experiences of my intellectual life was reading her great political novel, The Dispossessed, when I was a junior in high school. In 1983, she gave a commencement address at Mills College in Oakland, California. She called it her left-handed commencement address. And rather than conclude with my words, I want to conclude with hers. She said to the assembled graduates, "I hope you live without the need to dominate and without the need to be dominated. I hope you are never victims, but I hope you have no power over other people. And when you fail and are defeated and in pain and in the dark, then I hope you will remember that darkness is your country, where you live, where no wars are fought and no wars are won, but where the future is. Our roots are in that dark. The earth is our country. What hope we have lies there, not in the sky full of orbiting spy eyes and weaponry, but in the earth we have looked down upon, not from above, but from below, not in the light that blinds, but in the dark that nourishes, where human beings grow human souls." Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jacobs. I know there may be some of you need to go. If you do, that's fine, of course. But we have a bit of time.
I don't think it's fine.
A bit of time for questions from you, and just remind you, since the Arte Initiative is interested in the cultivation of virtues, that one of the virtues of a question is that it's brief, it's civil, and it's a question.
Somebody said recently that his rule in academic context was when you ask a question, your first sentence should be a question, and there should be no second sentence.
With that ominous caveat, any questions?
Now we've scared everybody. Yes, Chris.
Who is doing this well or can show us how to do this well, this fruitful vision?
You know, I mean, I think it's done in places large. I don't know that there's any institution that overall you recommend, but you look at pieces of institutions or particular places. I was, this is going to sound like abject flattery, but I was just tremendously impressed with Walter's students today and the ways in which they were putting together different disciplinary interests and levels of expertise into a kind of a coherent set of questions. And I felt like some of them had the confidence to push back at me in ways that I thought were very helpful. They were charitable and constructive, but sharp, and so I walked away thinking, well, something really good is happening in that little sub-community. So I imagine that it's something that administrators really need to have noses for. Who are the people in your school who are changing student lives for the better? And what are they doing that could be extended to other programs and other professors? And I think most schools look for that in one way or another, right? But it just seems to me that that's what I would do. Yeah.
If you'll wait 1 second, have a microphone brought to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe it's a two-sentence question. I wonder whether you could say a little bit more about the metaphor of play, because we do, in this time, certainly have often a very competitive concept of play.
Yeah.
One in which there is a great deal of adversarial energy, and in which often, especially in the area of sports, a great deal is at stake. Not all of it being actually about the sport, but much of it being about money. And for Huizinga and also for Schiller, it seems to me that, Schiller wrote plays,
Yeah.
and that the experience of being a player in a play meant something quite different than what we, I think, habitually now associate. And so I wonder whether you could parse a little bit more the different senses of play and in which way that metaphor really is meant to work in your argument.
Yeah, that's a fabulous question, and it's going to be an effort to try to keep my answer within bounds. But I said that there is a kind of a porosity between the realm of play and non-play, and that is inevitable. And I think sometimes that boundary can become so porous that the game-like character is lost altogether. And I certainly think that's the case. Forgive me for saying this at Duke University, but I think big college sports often has this. This is one of the reasons why the scandal at Michigan State happened. Just the sense that certain violations of law and human dignity had to be accepted because there's so much money at stake, millions and millions of dollars at stake. So yes, the boundaries are porous, and students don't feel that they are playing a game when you're not inclined to take intellectual risks if you think a bad grade in this class might be the thing that keeps me from getting into medical school or keeps me from getting into law school. And that's just not a problem that you can handle on one front. That has to be handled in multiple ways. I think it's got to be, graduate admissions committees need to learn how to recognize intellectual ambition and intellectual creativity in ways that do not necessarily reflect on transcripts. They can't say, we're just going to look at 4.0s or we're just going to look at 3.9s. That's just bad practice in general. I think teachers can find ways to try to encourage intellectual risks without threatening students with punishment along those lines. There have got to be ways to get people to inhabit certain ideas and frames of mind that in a way that is liberating for them rather than frightening. So this is just one example, but when for many years I taught a class in literary theory, and that was a class in which students were afraid of the material and struggled with the material, and they found writing papers on the material extremely painful. And what I eventually hit on was the idea of not asking them to write papers, but rather asking them to write dialogues in which they would put two theorists in conversation with one another. And I asked them to anchor that conversation in the text in such a way that you could cite where you were getting this, but also to be willing to put words in their mouths, to imagine the implications of their thinking. What would happen if this thinker came into contact with this thinker? How would she develop her ideas further than she did because she never heard that particular objection? And it was amazing how liberating that was for the students. They became playwrights. And they would genuinely have fun with it. One of the things that I loved about it was that they were, in a sense, impersonating the dramatis personae themselves. They were. There's the famous Dickens line about the woman who says that she loves to have her husband read the newspaper because he do the police in different voices. And that's what they're doing. They're doing the police in different voices. And that ended up being an absolute success. I need to find a similar kind of strategy or similarly liberating kind of strategy for my other classes. Realizing that a standard academic paper is valuable, but it's not the only way to get at the kinds of intellectual excellences that we want. So that's just an example. Yeah.
Thank you. I love the concept of play as an image. And the question is, how do we know when we've hit the limits of what play can allow? So I think about the social life of universities, for example, is also a kind of laboratory for play. And yet, for example, rape or sexual violence hits the limits, and play is no longer possible in that context. Are there So thinking about the intellectual life of universities, are there ways of engaging the other that hit the limits of what play can allow, where play is no longer possible, and how do we know when we've reached those limits?
Yeah. Well, if I could answer that question, I would be the emperor of American education, I think. I mean, we don't know. That's the thing, we don't know. And so as a result, the tendency of the American educational system, like that of the American society in general, is to oscillate between extremes of liberty, of license and of narrow rigidity, right? Where we can never find that proper balance. And I think we probably shouldn't expect to, because what we're talking about is essentially aiming at a moving target from a moving vehicle. That the calculus is just a little bit too complicated for most of us to do. And so I think that that one of the colleges and universities clearly are beginning to realize anyway that sexual behavior especially cannot be sort of left alone in the way that it often has been since the sexual revolution of the 60s, that catastrophic problems are happening and must be addressed. I'm wondering, though, whether for those of us who teach, that it's possible to create a classroom environment that is in some ways a respite from the intensities that the students feel elsewhere, where the stakes are so high and pain so easily and instantaneously becomes genuine harm, sometimes grievous harm, sometimes lasting harm. Is there a way to make the classroom a place where students can feel more at peace and more secure because there is an environment of trust there? To think, I mean, that's a weird sort of thing, right? Because social life is supposed to be, I mean, ideally, social life is where you let off steam from the intensities of the classroom. But I sort of wonder whether we don't have to flip that now. That in a culture where social, including especially sexual identity, so incredibly vexed, so incredibly intensely experienced, and where everybody is claiming that they don't know whether they do or not, claiming they don't know what the rules are. Can the classroom, by context, be one of the more freeing places rather than one of the more constraining places on campus? I don't know, but I'm inclined to think that's a really good idea. So, to try to do that. We have one up here.
I think in Schiller's time, wouldn't you say that there were certain moral and ethical codes, at least among the intellectual elite or the elite, and moral social codes that he just assumed that was going to be part of it? I don't think you can say the same thing now. So my question is, where does a moral or an ethical impulse fit into your concept of play?
Right. So, two things. First of all, I don't know that Schiller could have said that, because in the late 18th century, German university was a chaotic mess, which was known for its complete failure to educate students, and the fact it was like Animal House, and in fact Schiller was part of a group of German intellectuals who completely renovated the structure of the German university as a way of trying to bring some kind of intellectual order and system to it. So this is actually before that really got underway. My friend Chad Wellman, who teaches at UVA, he's in German Studies at UVA, you should have Chad come down here and talk to you, has written a magnificent book about the creation of the German Research University called Organizing Enlightenment. That's just fantastic. And he was spearheading the reform of the general education program at University of Virginia just as he was writing that book, which was, putting those things in relation to another was very interesting. But about the question about the morals, the moral or ethical impulse, play only works if, this is just reasserting what I said in the talk, play only works if there is a situation of trust. And in some ways, philosophers talk about what is first philosophy, but if you talk about ethics, what is first ethics for the university? I feel like first ethics for the university is trust. I really don't think universities, by and large, do enough to create the structures and the practices, especially among professors, that would make students feel they can trust their students. And this has been an interesting thing. Let me just give a quick example of that. So again, I taught for many years at Wheaton College, Christian liberal arts college, all kinds of problems like all colleges and universities. But there was a kind of a common faith statement. And it was amazing how helpful that was in the classroom, in the sense that students all had a kind of a basic idea of where you were coming from, because you had signed on to the same beliefs that they signed on to. And that was, there are reasons not to do that. I moved from a place where they had that statement of faith to a place where we don't. And there are reasons for that. I wanted to have certain kinds of educational opportunities that I didn't have in that more defined environment. But what was interesting is how that got you at least 2 or 3 steps closer to trust. It didn't mean that you didn't still have to win their trust, but there was a kind of a ground line that you could work from, where they knew what you believed about a series of things. Students come into our classes, they don't know anything about what we believe. They don't know about, they take a while to figure that out. They've heard rumors, there's a rumor mill. They trust some of them, others they don't trust. They don't get consistent information. They're not quite sure what to do. The result of that is that they hold you at some distance. And their goals may not be your goals. Their interests may not be your interests. The reason you're teaching the class may not be the reason they're taking the class, right? And so there's a work that has to be done to create the trust within which play becomes possible. And so what I would really love to see colleges and universities do is to think really hard about the problem of trust. Trust as the first ethics of the university experience. Because I think that's something, if we put our mind to, we could really make a big difference in how we're able to win our students over.
Do morals and ethics constitute boundaries, and boundaries are the kind of underpinning of trust, where you
Sure,
know
no,
that
absolutely.
you can do this, but
Yeah, but not that. No, that's absolutely right. That is to trust us to be people who fairly observe and monitor the boundaries of the game in such a way that people are not at liberty to emotionally or psychologically destroy people in the classroom. But so that kind of guidance is absolutely essential to the trust, it seems to me. Yes, there was a.
Let's take one last question here.
So I appreciate your distinction between pain and harm, because I think it's at the crux of so many of the controversies on campuses and in universities these days, especially in the classroom environment. But you mentioned that you can't judge for someone else whether what they're experiencing is harm or pain, and I understand that. It's also very difficult to judge for yourself in the moment whether what you're experiencing is harm or pain.
Right.
So, and it's so important to make that distinction, so how does it get made?
Well, it gets made dialogically, it gets made conversationally, it gets made when students and teachers know one another. Again, the trust has to happen, for that to be the case. This is, again, why you promise that you will try to make the pain beneficial and not allow it to devolve into harm. You promise you will try, but you cannot promise to do it, right? For the exact same reason that I couldn't promise all those worried Christian parents that their students were going to graduate believing exactly what they wanted them to believe. I can't promise it. There is a level of risk which is inherent to the experience. And so I know I'm sounding like a broken record here, but if there is that level of risk, and if pain really can become harm, and it can, why wouldn't students just simply try to insulate and protect themselves against pain? Because it could become lasting harm. Why shouldn't they? Well, they shouldn't unless we can give them some reason to believe that the risk is worth taking. And that the pain, we will try not to let it devolve into harm, but if it does, we hope that that can be healed. And we hope that we can be instruments of that healing. And we will make an effort to do so. But we will make that effort to do so without promising an environment in which no pain will ever befall them. And so there's just, those are the terms on which the little miniature social order, the world of play, those are the terms on which it's negotiated. And it is constantly under negotiation. It's never over and done with. It is something that is begun anew to some extent every time you meet with a student and in every class period. And you just have to pledge yourself to that never-ending work if you're going to be a teacher who really makes a difference. So I wish I could lay out ways in which I could assure people that the pain will never become harm. I can't.
On that note, I think recognizing people's schedules, we should wrap things up. I think personally, working through this metaphor of play and thinking about it in relation to the deep challenges the university faces is going to be quite fruitful. And thank you all for investing this time with us this evening. And join me in thanking Professor Jacobs once more.
I know he wants to come back. I think he's been good. It's hard. It's like moving to a new city. Like the job is like it's a great position. You don't have as much time in the show. That's the thing is like that's the thing is it's really hard. I mean, making friends in college. He actually made. No, he's the man. I think it's been a little bit. I think it's the first his roommate. You know Tyler. His roommate. He's like Joel. This whole thing. I don't think I'll he was like shrunken. Graduated from this. Awesome. Yeah, around that way, yeah. So I went to high school in Western. We have about an hour back in the world. I guess look at the basketball. The basketball game is 30 minutes. Nice to meet you, Kevin. Have you been to the best show? Bit of a You're almost there. Basically, no, it's when you go through it, increase network access. His first name is Duke. How about that? All right.
Our taste is we want it. I don't know. Soil around when it works. It might not get seeds right around. I think they're going
Yeah, I'll be around.
Kevin Gusker, this is our current.
Nice to meet you.
I'm worried about
Allowing us to, and he didn't even take up the whole front row. He could have moved.
On the French close and your next close.
I got a bar right now. I'm going to steal.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I haven't been over there.
What's good to see Very long-standing. But he has retired, so there's conscripted. That's right. They don't need to do anything. How are you doing? You have so many challenges. Think about it. Pray for me every day. I do. I walk by that little lobby and I see the door on the left and the door on the right. A person with a very small problem.
All right, I'll put on it.
Appreciate it.
But hey, you bring
Oh, you are? You're right over there? Yeah. Okay. I think we're going to start at 7:30. Really flattered. You really want to No, we do this right. This is like our first band. Thanks for coming.
Wow, that's really bold.
Yeah, I drove over. We probably all AV, and then I feel.
I don't know if I have room in it. I know my wife's car. I know my wife's car.
I felt like you had that.
Notre Dame's playing here right now.
You're welcome.
I'll remember to invite you next time.
I mean, and that was a big part of the program.
More than the book.
Well, I mean, the book is for everybody. Right.
This was, yeah, all right.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. I know I'm not as strong. Say what?
Let's go to Joey or
As soon as I saw Brand, I was like, oh, I know Brand. I don't know why I said here's a small story.
I really struggle with whether to put the stuff about showing. Okay, once you get to late, it's going to eliminate term and stuff. It's a great opportunity for.
Now you're intimidated.
Yeah, well, it was just a bad. Very complicated. And so, by the time the guy asked the question about I was totally fine. So I just say whatever I want to now. All right. No, that's exactly right. 2 in a row. I had hoped, I didn't think.
Well, no, I didn't. That's why I said
I had hoped that my
that was awesome. I mean, I'm not salt talk.
There wasn't one inches.
This is always where it goes. Yeah. We're going to talk about
It would have been interesting to hear.
Like anything lower than like
Did see Paul?
Yeah, I did see Paul.
all right, see you, Brant.
I think Paul's going to be here. So,
Tomorrow, noon.
whatever that place is, it would have been interesting to hear what Stanley had to say.
He's got very easy. It's on 9th Street. I thought it's not
As
Leave to be
Is it Alpaca?
That's really part of
I'm gonna look.
I think
I don't have it. Edward, I am almost positive that we really talked about it and set it up. Yeah, I've got it. So I haven't looked it up yet.
It's on 9th Street, really close to Black.
I think
Oh, it is?
Okay. Three chances.
I don't think Paul's really built.
I don't think he will have one.
Yeah.
You know, I never did get one of those things made.
I don't think.
I was wondering what he was thinking actually. And I wonder how he would characterize his own classroom.
I don't know.
For something like that tonight, that's a good idea.
All the glory
Newspapers.
could have had more than it does already now.
It would have been something as opposed to nothing.
Yeah, I'm not, Stuart and I sure if you're gonna make it, it's gonna make it.
I know.
That can't be a full play. Man,
For
law
people
schools,
who
yeah.
love insert
Somebody to take over this thing, doesn't even bring them advance.
Positions actually.
Well, I look forward to tomorrow, buddy.
Yeah, me too. I'm feeling better than you were.
Clobber me.
Oh,
Attempts to clobber them.
Right,
Canadian argument ended with me having a black eye.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. To make my points, I
Literally come
would
back.
push my points in the Griffiths fashion all the way.
You want an answer?
The conclusion is as much you are wrong as it is I am right.
Yeah, yeah.
And the next thing I know, I'm looking up,
Yeah.
and I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I guess that is the argument.
Yeah. And you know, the
We're,
I'm fine with that. I mean, I've had conversations with Paul that ended up not like that, but nobody punched anybody. But you know, we're pretty confrontational. I'm totally fine with it too. But I sort of think there has to be some agreement about that in advance. You know?
It's a very genuine question.
Yeah.
I'd say you're
Yeah.
still.
So you have to be very careful
I think that's right.
that you're not excluding people by your,
I haven't gotten to know that many folks over there as I thought.
because you won't hear what they have to say if they just get disgusted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, but I'm just thinking, he's not gonna like it, but I imagine he'll also let me know if he doesn't like it.
Historians. That's what he does.
Should we leave?
So you're gonna ride down with Madison.
I'll
okay?
ride down with anybody who'll take me where I can get a
He's
drink.
parked right here, so.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Madison?
Yeah.
You have anything to carry?
No, I'm all good.
Let's do it.
All right.
We'll see y'all there. Okay.
All right.
I called him and I said, open the bar now. Yeah. Who's to say, head down.
Again, thanks so much.
John, are you driving?
Great.
Yeah, are you driving?
Okay, great.
Or I can drive. What do you want to do?
My car
Where's your car?
is, it's like over
The
by
East Campus or here?
Get towards East Campus.
Towards East
So
Campus.
we'd have to get on the bus.
Okay, same for me.
Freedom
but-
Center.
All right, we'll start heading that way. You got your own car. You're gonna get down. Oh, you're gonna Uber.
Follow me.
Why don't we just all Uber?
No, why would we do that? I'm in for anyway.
What do you mean?
How far
Ryan?
should you walk to your car?
Oh, well, we could hop, if we can catch it east-west, then we can be in there 10 minutes from now.
What do you think? Okay.
What would you exclude all of the details that are
Leave them here.
That's it.
I can take you home.
I'll deal with it tomorrow. I don't want you guys to have to mess with it.
on?
Are we not allowed to?
Well, how long are you?
What happens?
I'm not sure.
Let's.
We
You take John and I'll
Yeah.
go over.
don't really have anywhere to hold them.
Yeah.
I'm gonna move over to be host, John.
If you come in the morning.
I'm gonna come first thing in the morning. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I think that'll.
This feels like, after a big dinner and there are dirty dishes, you ever have those nights where you just say like,
In the morning.
I'm just gonna deal with that in the morning.
Yeah. Just remember tomorrow.
This was a success, that's all.
Just remember tomorrow that access to the room is restricted.
Has what?
So the room is restricted.
Yes, I know, I can get in here. I know who to talk to.
Lovely.
Thank you
Good
both
job.
so much.
No
How did that go?
problem.
You good?
It was perfect. Yeah.
Good, good. All right.